In this video, you're going to learn 5 tips for leading a blended worship service, taking the old, taking the new, mixing them together, making half of your church mad and the other half of your church mad as well. No, I'm going to teach you how to not make people angry today. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below and let's get into it, because today we're talking about blended worship services. And if you're watching this, I assume that you lead a blended worship service. You already know that typically a blended worship service is taking a traditional service and a contemporary service and trying to mix them together. And it's really difficult because usually those two groups don't want what the other group has to offer, and it's hard to make compromises in a church. And so what I want to show you today are 5 tips that will help you lead in that environment, because I know that it's really difficult. Just a little background on my experience on this. I've never felt comfortable in talking about this before because I haven't led in a blended worship service environment too much before, but over the past few months, my church has started doing a renovation on our worship space, and so we moved from the sanctuary space that we were normally in. We have another building that's like a community center, sort of like a gym. We moved down there for a temporary space while the sanctuary is being renovated, and because of that, we've moved to one service. So before we had a traditional service and a contemporary service. For this limited time, we have mixed those two together into a blended service, and now I've led in that environment for 2 or 3 months, and it's a struggle. It is a struggle to find the compromises that you can make, but I think that I've found a few things that have worked, and I want to share those with you today for you to try in your own worship ministry if you're leading in that context. And if you are leading in that context, I want to hear from you right now. I want to hear what has been your biggest struggle in leading and planning a blended worship service. What has been the hardest part? I'm sure there's a million things that you could say. There's a lot of difficult parts. You can leave them all down in the comments below. But let me know in the comments below, what's been your biggest struggle in leading in a blended worship service? Let me know down below. Talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your comments down below. Let's get into it. Let's learn how to lead these blended worship services well, and the people in the services too. All right, tip number 1 is to ask yourself this question: who am I leading? Who are the people in my church? Who are the people that I've been given the responsibility of leading every single Sunday? And take a snapshot of your entire church, all of the people that you're going to be leading, not who you want to be leading, we'll get to that in a second, but who you're actually leading, and ask yourself not just who am I leading, but now that I know who I am leading, how can I lead them well? I did this for my church over the past 3 months, and the more I thought about it, even though I prefer to lead contemporary worship, if I honestly ask myself, who am I leading? It's a lot of people from the traditional service. I would say that probably honestly makes up like 75% of the people who are there on a Sunday morning. And so that led me to draw the conclusion that, okay, even though I prefer contemporary worship music and we do 5 songs in a service, originally I was doing 3 contemporary songs, 2 hymns, but I needed to flip that ratio because the majority of the people at my church were from the traditional service. And so for this time, this limited time of a blended service, I just feel like my time is best utilized doing more hymns, because that's what the majority of the people who are actually attending my church, that's what will serve them well, even if it's not what I prefer. So ask yourself that question: who am I leading? And maybe you find the opposite answer. Maybe you find, okay, well, 90% are this new generation coming in with like a contemporary preference. And so I'm going to pick songs or I'm going to focus more on that and do like less hymns, whatever it is. Just be familiar with the people in your church and ask objectively what will lead them best. Not what you want to do or what you think is good, but what will actually lead them best. That's the first thing you can do to lead well during a blended worship service. On to question number 2 to ask you, which is equally important, is we aren't just insider focused as a church. I hope we aren't just working to maintain the people who are already at our church, right? So the second question that you need to ask is, who is my church trying to reach? That is the mission of the church, right? We are to go out and make disciples, right? And so think about the people that you're trying to reach, and don't let your answer be, well, we're trying to reach everybody, because as the quote says, if you're trying to reach everybody, you will reach no one, right? So have a context that you are trying to reach, like a group of people that you're trying to reach. Maybe you're trying to reach young families, and you say, okay, our church is really focused on young families right now. That's what every church says, because they know if there's more young people in their church, they'll have kids, and then those kids will have kids, and that's the easy way to grow your church, apparently. But if that's what you're trying to reach, then most young families are not looking to sing hymns every Sunday, right? That's just the truth. Like, the majority of young families aren't coming to a church that's singing hymns. That's just the fact of the matter, right? So then you have to find the balance of, okay, here are the people who are at my church, but here are the people that we're trying to reach. And there's a balance there, but what's more important? Is it just keeping all the people that you currently have, or is it reaching new people? I just think of like the mission of the church. Our mission as the church is to not hold on to the people that we already have. Jesus didn't say, find a group of 75 to 100 people to create a church, and then you'll be good, and just do everything you can to make them happy. Oh, he said, go out into the world and baptize people in my name, teaching them to follow my commands. The Great Commission. We are to go out. At least that's my philosophy for church. So we shouldn't be insider focused exclusively. Yes, we want to lead the people at our church well, but we're also called to reach new people. And new people who haven't been in church before, like, they're going to identify with the type of music that they're used to, which is, and I don't need to tell you this because you're already watching my channel, but you know that contemporary music is more modern, hence the name contemporary, so it will connect with younger families better. So just ask yourself, maybe that's not your philosophy on church. If it isn't, then do whatever you want to do. But ask yourself, first of all, who am I leading? Number 2, who is my church trying to reach? And then make decisions based with balancing those two answers to those questions. Tip number 3 is to redefine the win. Redefine the win. Whenever I first started planning blended services, and I still feel myself doing this from time to time, it's like, okay, what is the win? And at face value, it's like, well, how do I take these two groups of people and make them both perfectly happy? How do I take these two groups of people who want different things and make them both perfectly happy? And I don't think that that's the goal. Like, that can't be our win, because it's probably not going to happen. No matter how many hymns you do, you're never going to do enough hymns. No matter how many contemporary songs, you're never going to do enough contemporary songs. And there's always going to be somebody who complains. But at the end of the day, your goal is not to make people happy. Like, the people at your church shouldn't be coming there just to receive and to just like be made comfortable, right? Like, no, we all have a responsibility whenever we gather as the church. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is the win? If there needs to be a compromise and no side is going to be perfectly happy, then what is the win? What do we point people towards? And I think oftentimes it's like intergenerational worship. And like, really focusing on the fact that we are worshiping together. And you can even call out, like, don't be afraid to call out those things that everybody is already thinking. I think at the altar of every blended worship service is this gigantic elephant just sitting there in the room that nobody actually wants to be here singing songs that they don't want to sing. I'm just being honest, right? And so you can call that out and be like, okay, hey, thanks for coming to church today. It's great that we get to worship here together and read a little scripture. Like, there's so many psalms that talk about speaking about God's goodness from one generation to the next, and you can bring that into the conversation and like talk about how, okay, maybe you're not used to repeating some lines multiple times like we do in contemporary worship songs, but this is why we do it. Or maybe you're not used to singing hymns, like this is why we do that. And just flesh these things out for people and like call out the elephant in the room. Everybody's already thinking about it anyway, so if you just talk about it, then the elephant shrinks and gets smaller and eventually disappears, and then everybody's on the same page, and you can redefine the win. And the win is not to make everybody happy, it's to worship together as one church. So redefine the win. Not how do I make everybody happy, but how can I lead people in a way that's going to allow them to encounter God? How can I lead people in a way that's going to allow them to encounter God apart from their musical preferences? If you can find out the answer to that question, you will be successful in planning your blended worship services. Number 4, don't separate contemporary and traditional time. I know the temptation whenever you plan a worship service is like, it would be really easy. Let's say you do 5 songs during your worship service. It would be really easy to just have 3 hymns up front, and then after the message, we do 2 contemporary songs. And boom, now you see you've got something for traditional, something for contemporary. I don't think you should do that. I think that just elevates the divide of musical preferences in your church even more. So I think it's much more beneficial to try to find a way to connect those two, and maybe you do a hymn up front that then leads right into a contemporary worship song that leads in to a traditional hymn, and so on and so forth, and you mix them together, and then it feels like, from a musical side of things, that these are meant to be. Like, we're not just doing songs to do songs, but we're finding out how to mix these songs together. And for example, this Sunday, I'm doing How Great Thou Art at the beginning of our service, which is kind of like a traditional song. And then after that, I'm going into Lion and the Lamb, right? Completely different ends of the spectrum musically, but they both speak to the greatness of God. I think of the bridge in Lion and the Lamb, who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Like, to use that line to complement this idea that God is great, how great thou art, right? And like, he created everything. Like, those two themes fit together. So start expanding your set list and your repertoire, and not just include like, okay, I've got 3 hymns to do, so I'm going to pick these 3 hymns, and then I've got 2 contemporary songs, so I'm going to pick 2 contemporary songs that work together. No, try to find a way that mixes them together. And then not only, because that's what we're aiming for in our blended worship service, right? We want people to worship together. That's why we're blended, right? So don't create 2 separate worship times during your service. Try to find ways that contemporary songs and hymns can work together. And finally, number 5, when you are singing hymns, pick familiar hymns. Pick hymns that pretty much everybody knows. Even younger people, they know hymns. Like, they know Amazing Grace. They know Jesus Paid It All. And you can see what songs, like, there's a lot of contemporary music songs that have like taken hymns and maybe rearranged them a little bit. So you can take those hymns, and those are popular hymns, and you can use those as your quote unquote traditional worship song quota. Don't have a quota whenever you're leading worship, but you know what I mean. Like if you're like, I'm gonna do 3 hymns, make sure that they're hymns that everybody knows. I always look at like the hymnals, and there's 800 different songs in there. There's no way that nobody can know. There's no way that anybody can know any or all of those songs. Like, it just seems crazy to me. So pick the familiar ones, and that means that younger people will at least know them and be able to sing along to Amazing Grace. They probably heard that before. They probably heard How Great Thou Art, whatever. You know what songs the people in your church might know. But then also, in addition to that, I've noticed that the traditional churchgoers in my church, like they love that. They don't want to sing some random hymn that they'd never heard before. They want to sing songs that they know, just like we want to sing songs that we know whenever we lead contemporary worship, right? So pick songs that people know. All right, these hymns have been around forever. There aren't a lot of new hymns. So it's not like you have to pick the newest, hottest hymn and teach it to someone, right? Just pick the classics. They're gonna love it. And there's probably like a lot more classics that everybody knows than you realize. Like you probably, if you sat down, come up with a list of like 20 or 25 hymns, and there you go. You've got your repertoire of hymns that you're gonna lead for the next year. So think about that in relation to that of picking familiar hymns. While we're talking about song selection, try not to pick contemporary worship songs that repeat over and over and over and over again. That might be appropriate in a contemporary worship setting, but I find that is like the one thing that really alienates traditional worship service people, because they don't get it whenever we just sing the same words over and over again, even though hymns are just using the same melody over and over again for 8 verses. But just that's one sticking point that you can avoid. There are a lot of songs out there that don't repeat over and over again, so try to shy away from that if you're looking to find a compromise between the traditional preference and the contemporary preference. So there it was, a lot of talk about blended worship service. That's kind of my philosophy behind how I've been planning my blended worship services. I think that our blended worship services are going to move back to 2 services here after Easter. We're almost done with the renovations. I'll probably make a renovation video at some point for this channel and just show you what we updated. You know, I'm not super into gear, but it'll probably still be interesting. So there it was for blended worship services. If you want to improve your worship leading, not just in a contemporary environment, but even in a blended worship service environment, then I've got something for you. I put together a free audio training. There's a link to it down in the description below. It's called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. And these are just 5 simple tips that if you just know them and make the effort to do them, they will instantly improve your worship leading. So if you're interested in that, check it out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.